All stand, please. Please be seated.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Reid.
Thank you. Dr. Marsden-Smedley, your evidence about crowning within the hatched area, Area 2.
Yes,
Thank you.
or adjacent to Area 2.
Well, can we get up, please, probably the last screenshot. In the green the potential for spotting in the green rectangle.
I describe that as close to a crown fire, or partial crown fire.
I understand. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. So your evidence about partial crown fires in that area carries with it an assumption that something changed in the January 13 fire, doesn't it?
The fire was building up as it moved away from the ignition point, and that is where the fuels would have been suitable for the intensity to get to the stage of partial crown fire.
But if we can just go back a step, you give the opinion that there's a partial crown fire within the rectangular in the hatched area based upon what you see in your high resolution images.
That's correct.
Right. Now, that carries with it an assumption that might be a fair assumption, but it carries with it an assumption that something had changed in the January 13 fires to the crowns.
The crown has been impacted by fire. Yes.
Yes. That's the assumption you make.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, now, if Mr. Tempone could bring up there are 6 images he's just been handed. If we can get the first 2 side by side, please. It's not the first 2 I need. If we can go, just remove those, please. I'm sorry. Oh no, it is those first 2. Sorry, it is those. Now, I asked you to accept that the descriptor on those are correct. One on the left is a Google Earth image taken in December 12, and the one on the right is a Google Earth image taken after the fire in January 13. Do you see the area of partial crowning that you've described?
Oh, Your Honour,
Yes, Mr. Armstrong.
Your Honour, I think I need to object. Firstly, the provenance of these photographs has not been established. It can only perhaps be put to Dr. Marsden-Smedley as an assumption. And just looking at the 2 photographs, with great respect to my learned friend, I don't think it's even clear that the photographs were taken with the same exposure, well, aperture settings, or any of the other things that affect the representation of an image through a photograph or a digital version of a photograph. I mean, the questions are a little unfair.
Mr. Reid?
I've asked Dr. Marsden-Smedley to accept the descriptor at the top, assume they're Google Earth photographs, and I've asked him one question. Is he able to see in effect, the rectangular area in the December 12 photo and or the January 13 photo? There's nothing unfair about that.
All right, well, I'll allow it to go on for a moment and see where you're headed.
Yeah.
A major issue with Google Earth...
No. Are you able to see it?
Not clearly, no, because of the characteristics of the Google Earth image.
Right. Well, are you able, in the December 12 image, to identify the area that you have in which you placed the rectangle?
Oh, objection. Again, Your Honour, in fairness, the witness should at least be shown the previous map so that he can get his bearings, which was JMS4. I meant the photograph, not the map, Your Honour.
This is the green rectangle we're talking about?
Yes. Yes, can that be placed alongside the December image, please? Are you able to identify?
What I was about to say a minute ago was that the default in Google Earth is that as you zoom in, it automatically comes down and pans and gives you an oblique image looking across the landscape. And that's what's happened on the two Google images we had. And so that they're actually looking at an angle, not vertically down. Now, you can set Google Earth to not do that pan, which is what I've done when I use Google Earth. And there's also another major issue with Google Earth in that the way it displays the ground surface is it still assumes it's a sphere and it doesn't put it back into a flat image like it is on a screen. As a result, I think I can see where you're wanting me to look, but it's such low resolution and so unclear compared to the image I have on my screen here, where it is a proper auto-rectified plan image and much, much higher resolution. So I can see it on this one on my laptop, but it's very difficult to see it on the Google Earth because of the limitations of the Google Earth image.
I think that's a no, Mr. Reid.
I think it is a no, Your Honour. Dr. Marsden-Smedley, within the rectangle, the damage that's shown there is to elevated fuel, not to the crown.
It is to a mixture of the elevator fuel and some of the crown. On my image here, it's much clearer.
And on your image, there is a possibility that one crown has been impacted.
On my image, it looks like there's probably 4 or 5, maybe more, crowns that have been partially consumed.
Thank you. Now, could we get up the two images that you've got, Mr. Temponi, which are headed Warmby's Creek? Now, in fact, if we take those down and we'll go back to the image which is CV 150. CV 150, please, Mr. Temponi. Now, Dr. Marsden-Smedley, between, I'll ask Mr. Temponi, could you move your cursor, please, into the black hatched area? Move it to the red hatched area to start with, and then I'll take you to the black one. Yes, the black one, thank you. Now, if we move across to the right from there, are you able to confirm by looking at this image that the area where Mr. Temponi has his cursor and a little to the south, in that area, is a full crown fire?
No, that is not a full crown fire. That is it's a lot more open forest in that it's probably verging on woodland rather than forest there. And that means that the canopy cover would have been down around the 30%, not higher than that. And some of the trees are have not been consumed, the canopy, but it has mostly consumed the canopy in that area.
Right. Now, you accept, do you, that as a fire moves into an area that's been previously burnt, because of the lessened fuel weight, or fuel load, it will be slowed?
Yes.
And it will be significantly slowed?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, if we go back, if I just take your vision back to the hatched area, which shows the fire front at 3 o'clock, and move your mind or your eye across from that to the right, to the east and to the northeast.
Yes.
Which is the area to which I just took you.
That's right.
Right. Now, how is it that you say that that fire got there at 3:35 in 35 minutes?
Objecting on which fire is my friend to?
The fire which consumed the fire that consumed the trees, the tops of the trees in the area between the Black Hatch and the Line A.
What I would anticipate is that the fire has spotted over the area built. Sorry, I start again. Has spotted over the area burnt in the October 12 White Hill Road fire onto that upward slope, and has rapidly built up from spot fires that would have come across, i.e. leapt across the area burnt in the October 12 fire, and because of the reasonably steep upslope, the fire would have very rapidly built up from spots.
There's a difficulty with that theory though, Dr. Marsden-Smedley, in terms of wind direction, isn't there?
No.
The wind was blowing east, southeast, not southwest.
You mean west to west,
Sorry,
northwest?
Sorry. I mean it was blowing west, southwest, not west, northwest.
No, west, northwest.
Yes.
Not west, southwest.
Yes.
And what I would, not having actually done a fire spread direction at that specific location, it could well have been burning across that slope as it went across and up from spot fires that landed to just south and not far south of where you had your cursor. And that would be consistent with the way the fire spread from there and consistent with the smoke on the Mount Kernia radar.
I put it to you that in giving that answer, you are speculating.
To a certain extent, yes, I am, because I have not assessed that site on the ground after the fire, but it is a reasonable assumption to make based on the prevailing wind direction and the smoke coming off on the Mount Kernia radar and where the rest of the fire footprint went.
Where the rest of the fire footprint went, again, is an assumption made on your part because you haven't been in that area.
No, but I have no reason to doubt the professionalism of the fire service fire mappers at 17:35 on that day. It is a job that I've done very often myself, and I know how they would have done it, and it is a reasonable job to have done.
What they map is where fire had been, not where that fire came from. That is correct, isn't it?
No, what they are doing there is mapping the active boundary of the fire.
Thank you. They're not giving... Yes, thank you. That could be removed. If we could have document 13, please, page 0120. Now, this relates to this part of your report relates to your experience, and if we go down, we'll see experience in fire investigation.
Yes.
And you are a qualified fire investigator. You got that
Yes.
qualification in 2004.
Yes.
And you have performed between presumably 2004 and the time of this report, which was December of 2020, 25 investigations on over 25 bushfires.
Some of those fire investigations were performed prior to 2004, and I would argue that my experience based on a fire behaviour modeller and a operational firefighter far exceeds the requirements for the fire investigation course. So even though prior to 2004 I did not have formal qualifications, I was experienced at doing it prior to that time, and as with all government departments, they make sure that you cover all the bases by making sure you're qualified when you're doing a job. And there's been several times in my career when I have done training courses for jobs that I've been doing for a large number of years.
Dr. Marsden-Smedley, the 25 or over bushfires that you have investigated, have you investigated any of those for cause?
Yes.
What number?
The fires I'm talking about here, they would all have been done for working out how and why the fire started, so they would all be causes, right, 25.
And are they likely to be in buttongrass moorlands?
About 4 or 5 of them would have been in buttongrass moorlands, and the majority would have been in dry eucalypt forest.
Well, do you recall one of those that would have been in dry eucalypt forest?
Certainly. Adventure Bay on Bruny Island.
When was that?
About 2002.
What did you determine the cause of that fire?
Undetermined. We were able to get the start of the ignition down to a fairly small area, but we're not able to. If somebody comes, it was almost guaranteed to have been an arson fire, and if somebody just comes along and flicks their lighter and walks away with their lighter, you've got nothing. All you can say is the fire started about that point, and because that fire started at, from memory, 3 points along the four-wheel drive track, it is highly unlikely to have been a natural fire or an accidental fire. It is likely to be somebody deliberately lighting.
Thank you. Now, could document 118 please be brought up? Are you familiar with that publication?
No.
Can you go please to page 0327? Do you see there a photograph apparently of a tussock with fire direction indicated to be from the bottom of the left of the photograph towards that tussock?
I can see that's what that photograph is saying.
And do you agree with that fire direction?
Is this an American publication?
It is an American publication.
And are their fuels the same, their tussocks, is that relevant to our tussocks?
Well, Dr. Marsden-Smedley, do you agree with that or not?
That is what the picture is purporting. I have seen often a different circumstance where a fire will come in at the very early phases of the fire, i.e. when it's very close to the ignition point, where it comes in and it builds up in the tussock, leaving the entry point burnt to a smaller extent.
Yes,
I would also need to see in more detail the exact bases of the tussock grasses to be sure of that.
Yes, I tend to that page, Your Honour.
As
That and the front page, I should tend to, Your Honour, as a part of that publication. It was accepted by Mr. Walkley as an example.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, very well.
Now, could the witness please be shown Court Book 150? First of all, as to where you've drawn line A in that,
Yes?
and extending from, that shows an extension of the fire from the hatched area in a period of 35 minutes. Is that so?
I've just got to refresh myself.
Yes.
Yes, that is my prediction, yes.
Yes, thank you. Now, do you agree that you've not taken into account slowing from the 244 fire?
What I believe would have happened is it would have burnt around the 240, the White Hill Road fire, October 12. So it would have come around the south of that area.
Without being slowed?
Without being slowed. It was actually stopped at the boundary of the White Hill Road fire. So it didn't significantly burn into that area. It went around it.
And do you agree that the point B shown on that map does not take into account any start-up time for a fire at around point 11?
Yes, it does take into build-up time from point 11.
Well, what it shows is a fire which travels 2 point and a little bit of kilometres, right? Correct? That's what it's depicting?
From point 11
Yes,
to point B,
yes.
It's more than
4.5 kilometres.
I'm sorry, 4.5.
Sorry.
4.5 kilometres.
Yes.
Yes. What speed did you use for that?
I would have to go back to my spreadsheet.
Please do.
And one of the things I do is I have a working spreadsheet. So I would have to actually put all the figures back in again to give you that number. Because I was doing it for multiple options.
Well, you were only doing this one for one option, weren't you, Dr. Marsden-Smedley?
2 options.
Yes, I'm sorry, but you're only doing it for the option of the fire in terms of B, for the option of the fire from 11 through to B.
But it's the same spreadsheet that I've used for all of the other ones I've looked at. Starting...
Well, let me see if I can cut to the chase a little bit. We've got a fire that's travelling a little bit over 4 kilometres.
Okay.
If it's travelling at 30 metres a minute,
Yes.
right, it'll travel 1.8 kilometres in an hour.
I will accept your figures. All right.
30 metres a minute equals 1.8 kilometres an hour, does it not?
Yes.
And that, if it's travelling at that speed, it means it travels 3.6 kilometres in 2 hours,
Yes.
right? But it has to have reached its quasi-steady rate. There's no start-up time in those figures, is there?
Not in the 30 metres a minute, no.
No, thank you. So your assumption for the point B is that the fire started at about 1:30 at point 11.
That's right.
And in 2 hours, give or take 5 minutes, 2 hours and 5 minutes to 15:35. Yes, that's right. I thought I was confusing myself with the 24-hour clock there, Doctor. But in 2 hours, it's travelled that 4 and a bit kilometres, so there is no start-up time in there.
What I need to do is check my other figures, but my understanding is that the fire started out at about the 30 metres a minute, but then built up to 40. Is that correct?
Well,
I know it's detailed in this report from observations.
Your 40 was at 4 p.m.
Right.
But use 40 by all means, Doctor, because there's still no start-up time in it if you used 40. The probability is you use 35.6, but it doesn't matter because there is no start-up time.
I would have had a start-up time in there.
Well,
And but under that day, the start-up time is not that long. It would be if it's using 36 metres a minute, that's 4.3 kilometres. Now, in my report here, I have an observed spread rate once the fire is fully burning. I thought of around 40, but I can check that.
Well, use 40 if you like, Doctor.
Well, let the doctor check it, because my recollection was it was 46, but
From 1600, 43 metres a minute.
Yes.
So if you use 43, you end up with 5.16.
Yes.
So therefore there must be a build-up time.
Yes, but of course this occurred before 1600, didn't it? Well, this
Yes.
this is a
This
finishes at 1535.
But the weather conditions
Sorry,
were not.
at 1535.
The weather conditions from about 1:30 through for the rest of the afternoon did not vary greatly, so you would have had a similar fire behaviour for a fire burning starting at an earlier time as it burnt through that area. I know that when I did the fire prediction, I did use a fire build-up where I made the assumption of retarding the fire spread rate until the fire line length reached about 100 metres. And I did that iteratively because I knew that until the fire line length got to a reasonable length, the fire would be burning it slower than its potential spread rate.
Now,
And I can remember doing that.
yes, all right, Dr. Marsden-Smedley, I want to put this proposition to you. To support your acceptance of the TFS theory as to the cause of this fire,
Yes?
you have nothing more than, 1, the fact of the campfire, 2, a route that had burned at some unknown time, and 3, the absence of any other cause that you could find on the information available to you.
Plus the observed fire spread rate was consistent with a fire starting in that way.
In that general area.
In the general area of 242 Whitehill Road.
Yes. The observed fire spread rate says nothing about what sparks the fire.
No, all I can say is that the information I have available to me, including the information I collected at my site visit, was a fire starting somewhere in the vicinity of that stump. I cannot say exactly where because of the time frame and the fact that I did not do myself the original investigation, but what I can say is that the information was consistent with the TFS fire investigation and it did not fit the proposition that a fire started somewhere else.
Being off 242, you mean?
Being away from 242,
Yeah.
and it does not support the proposition that a fire started at a different time.
Good place.
yes, thanks, Mr. Reid. Mr. Armstrong.
Yes, I'm sorry, before that, I should just tend to CB 88, 103 and 114, Your Honour.
May I also make 1.2, please?
Just a sec, Mr. Armstrong can pick that up for you in a moment.
Okay.
That's all, Mr. Reid?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thanks. Yes, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Honour. What was that last point, Doctor?
In the evidence I gave in the earlier session, I was asked about a paper published in the International Journal of Wildland Fire by Story et al. And I had trouble recalling that paper when it was first put to me. In the break, I looked onto my hard drive and found that I had downloaded it and had reviewed it. And the reason why I didn't recall it was that I don't regard it as a very significant piece of work for advancing our knowledge, mainly because the only fire inputs they used were the fire danger rating and the size of the fire. As such, it provides very little information that we can use to advance our knowledge. And in my reply in the earlier session, I believe I said that rate of spread and intensity would be a more appropriate input, and I am sure that if they had used those, they would have ended up with a much more useful paper than the one they've got. And in fact, when I was an associate editor of the International Journal of Wildland Fire, which I was a few years ago, if that paper had been sent to me, I would have sent it back to do additional analyses. Because as it stood, I don't believe it was actually that useful. Thank you.
Could Mr. Temponi please bring up document 121? Now, just to be clear, Doctor, this is the paper you just referred to, I take it?
Yes, it is.
All right. Could Mr. Temponi please take us to Court Book page 0283? And in the right-hand column, in the middle of the page, you see a heading Model Accuracy. Doctor, could I just trouble you to read that to yourself for a moment and let me know when you're finished?
I would also add rate of fire spread as a critical factor there. And
well, I was going to ask you a question actually, Doctor. Now, firstly, Doctor, is there anything that you would add to that paragraph before? Well, in fact, no, I withdraw that. My question was going to be, Doctor, having read that paper previously, having reread that penultimate paragraph dealing with the model's accuracy, can I ask you, in your assessment, how does the model that's reported on in this paper compared to the MacArthur spot fire prediction submodel that you dealt with in your most recent report?
I would suggest that the MacArthur one is actually a more robust, even though it was produced in the 1960s, using very limited statistical knowledge in those days. I would suggest that it's actually a more useful and adds more understanding to our ability to manage spot fires and predict them than what this paper does.
And why is that, Doctor?
Because this paper does not include what I would consider to be the fundamental drivers of spotting, and that is the fire intensity and the fire rate of spread.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Temponi can close that one for us. And next, could I trouble Mr. Temponi, please, to bring up the map that you've been drawing on today, which is now, I think, Exhibit JMS4. And in fact, perhaps we get to that. Can we start with document 150, which was the source map for this screenshot? Now, you said in answer to some of Mr. Reid's questions, Doctor, that you had done some investigations in 2006 at a couple of points in this area for the purpose of working out whether they might be useful for a planned burning study. Have I got that right?
That's right.
And one of the areas was over in the, if we take the B line, it was in the grid to the west or left of the B line and up one from
That's correct.
the B, correct?
Yes.
And then there was a second area which was about 2 grids further to the west, is that right?
No, it would have been in mainly where the cursor's just been put.
Okay.
And it would also have been in the grid square directly north, because what I was doing was researching the interactions between fire and animal grazing and how sites with different productivity, i.e. growth rates, affected that. So I was looking at the sandstone black peppermint where the cursor was a minute ago, but also just north of there, just off the map, there's an area of basalt which has grassy eucalypt forest, which has much higher productivity, and I was going to burn both of those and then compare the effect of animal grazing, as I did in four other locations around the state.
All right, thank you. Now, just for the transcript, the cursor, the main grid reference that you've just identified, together with the one north of it, the one that you've focused on was easting 559,000 and northing 526,100.
That's right.
Correct? Thank you. Now, based on your observations of that area in 2006, Doctor, and then the observations that you made through this area when you attended for the purposes of your 2014 engagement for the purposes of the Bushfire inquiry.
Yes.
Can I ask you now to turn your attention to the area that we've been discussing this afternoon, which is the red hatching and the area between 242 White Hills Road and marker 11 on this map. Do you understand the
Yes.
area I'm asking you to look at?
Yes.
Now, immediately prior to the fire, could I ask you firstly to give to His Honour your assessment of the fuel loads and drop it down by category to surface, near surface, elevated, canopy and bark. Could you address each of those and tell His Honour what you expect would have been there immediately prior to the fire?
Okay. Now, in the area immediately adjacent to 242 Whitehill Road, the geological type is Permian mudstone with a silver peppermint open forest on it. That would have had fairly low fuel loads. I would anticipate in the area of around 10 tonnes per hectare of total fuel. The surface fuel stratum, I would anticipate would have been in the high category because of the amount of leaf litter and twigs you would have. Near surface would also have most likely have been only high, and then the elevated would have probably been moderate and the bark moderate. However, once you move a fairly short distance towards the east, you go off the fern tree mudstone according to the geological map and onto Triassic Sandstone. And then as you go further again, you go on to Jurassic Dolerite. Now, I've only looked at the area immediately to the east of where the mudstone is, and I would have anticipated that in that area on the Triassic Sandstone, you would have had the surface fuel going up to high to very high, the near surface being the same, the elevated high, and the bark, because it hadn't had a fire for a while, would also have been high. The fuel load would have been getting up around the 12.5 tonnes per hectare.
Can I just pause you there before we go further east again, Doctor?
Mm-hmm.
Could Mr. Temponi please bring up JMS4 again? And can we have a blue line, please, Mr. Temponi? And Doctor, I'm going to ask you to tell Mr. Temponi to draw a circle or some kind of shape to indicate roughly the area where the mudstone moved into the different material that you mentioned a moment ago that started with T, and I won't try and recall what it was called.
Triassic Sandstone.
Thank you.
And my memory is it's fairly close to being underneath the 2, but I can very easily pull it up on my laptop. And when I did my site visit, I went down as far as the boundary of the Triassic Sandstone and confirmed that yes, the geological type had changed because the soil between the Permian mudstone and the Triassic Sandstone is completely different looking. One is hard, bony, rocky, and the other one is sandy.
Well, perhaps I might trouble you to look at your high-resolution photograph, Doctor, and then just indicate or guide Mr. Temponi to indicate generally where the Triassic material started and where you assess it finished, if you're able to make that assessment.
What I'm doing now is I'm pulling up the Mineral Resources Tasmania geological map of Tasmania. which I have on my laptop, and yes, the boundary goes, you can see the 2, and the boundary goes in a southeast direction. If you draw a line from the 2, and then there's the small green circle down
Towards number 11?
just to the left of number 11, it pretty much goes through that line where I'm just confirming that. That's right. Yes, that is correct. It goes, that's right, that's pretty good. Where on the southwest side of that line, it is Permian mudstone.
So on the southwest, Mr.
Where the cursor is now.
Can we make a PM, please, for Permian mudstone? Thank you.
And on the other side of the line, maybe a TS for Triassic Sandstone.
Right. And then you referred to something from the Jurassic era, Doctor.
That's
Which,
the igneous.
as far as I know, has got something to do with Tyrannosaurus rex, but let's run from there.
Actually,
the-
Cretaceous for that, but that is beside the point. That is further over. I'm just looking at my map. It's all right, the Jurassic dolerite does not start for a considerable distance to the east. It's Triassic sandstone mostly. There are some patches of Permian mudstone, but most of it is sandstone once you go past what you call Untitled Park.
Okay, so when you say past Dunalley Park, it's mostly sandstone, you mean that's the Jurassic material?
No, that's Triassic.
I see. So Triassic sandstone is to the northeast of our blue line, and
Yes.
it continues as Triassic sandstone across the area of Dunalley Park. Is that right?
And then okay, the boundary of between the Permian mudstone and the Triassic sandstone goes through the middle of Dunalley Park, where again the southwest side being mudstone, northeast being sandstone, and then the ridge directly to the east of that is a patch of Jurassic dolerite, which is an igneous rock.
All right, so let's just work out where the Permian mudstone divide from Triassic sandstone is. If Mr. Temponi continues the blue line from the green circle essentially down to the bottom right-hand corner of the photo, is that kind of indicating it, Doctor? Or does it need
You can
to...
see where JMS 4, if you continue to there, yes.
to the top of the number 4, for instance? Is that what you mean?
No, about where the 4 intersects the 5 boundary. So the middle of the 4.
Thank you. So could you draw that blue line back to the green circle, Mr. Temponi? And then when you said the Jurassic area, Doctor, do you mean the ridge line that's further to the right of where this screenshot finishes?
That's correct.
All right. Could we perhaps just go back to document 150, Mr. Temponi? And does that mean, Doctor, that the Jurassic line is somewhere about line A on this photograph?
Yes, but not the entire of that hilltop. There's obviously a fault line through the hilltop where the northern part is sandstone, and then the ridge line, most of the top of the ridge line is dolerite.
All right, thank you. Now,
Where the yellow dot is would be dolerite, and then beyond the A line, going towards the north-northwest, goes back into sandstone.
all right, thank you. Now, back to, we'll just keep this photograph on screen. This is JMS4, Dr. Marsden Smedley. Given that you've answered my question about fuel loads in the Permian mudstone area and the Triassic Sandstone area, could I next ask you, having regard to what you have described in relation to the loads of the different kinds of fuels that were in those two areas, as at approximately 2:45 p.m. on the 3rd of January 2013, can you estimate for His Honour what you expect would have been, or which of those fuel loads would have been burning in each of those areas?
Do you mean which parts of the
Which
fuel?
of those components?
Which of those components of fuel? Surface, near surface, elevated, canopy and bark. By 2:45 in each of those areas.
Due to the very dry fuels prevailing at that time, all of surface, near surface, elevated and bark would have been burning, and in a few selected areas it would also have had a partial canopy fire as well.
Right. So do I take it from that, Doctor, that the green rectangle, we'll call it next to number 2, in your assessment is the partial canopy burn that you would have expected to have been occurring by about 2:45?
That's right.
Right, thank you. Now, can I also ask you about the distinctions between what goes on in a canopy during a bushfire? As I understood your evidence to my learned friend, a canopy can be affected by partials. I'll go through the categories. Firstly is partial scorch, correct?
Yes.
Second is full scorch.
Yes. I would actually start with no scorch, but yes.
Sorry, okay. So no scorch
Yes.
is number 1. Number 2 is partial scorch.
Yes.
Number 3 is full scorch.
Yes.
Number 4 is partial burn.
Partial crown fire, yes.
Thank you. Partial crown fire. And number 5 is full crown fire.
Yes.
Is there any other category?
I think I had unburnt as well.
I think that was your, number 1.
No, I think I went, in my scoring system I just had added 1 to all those numbers. I didn't realise you were actually trying to represent my numbers then. My numbers, you just add 1. So 1 is unburn,
Right.
through to 6 is full crown fire.
Full crown fire. Thank you. Now, my learned friend asked you some questions about the relationship between scorching in a crown and flame height,
Yes.
and referred you to your 2014 report that had the ratio of 10 to 14 times. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Now, would I be right, Doctor, in thinking that that relationship expresses the maximum? That for a given flame height, you would expect that there might be scorching up to 14 times the height of the flames?
No, I would anticipate that would be the average, not the maximum.
All right, thank you. Now, can I therefore ask you to look at things from the other direction? If you observe partial scorching on a crown at a given height, does it tell you anything? Does it enable you to assess what the flame height had been that passed under that crown?
Roughly, yes.
And I take it that on average it would be the 10 to 14.
That's right.
All right, thank you. Next question. Do you need to have crowning in order to have spotting?
No, definitely not.
Could you elaborate on that answer to His Honour? How do you get spotting without crowning?
you can still have a reasonably intense fire burning with a reasonable rate of spread with a well-developed column without getting full crown fire. With a lot of uplift, and in that situation, you can still get a lot of embers pulled off the trunks, particularly bits of bark off the trunk, and then lofted. It would obviously increase when you did have a crown fire, because the fire is a lot more intense in that scenario, but you still get significant spotting from a lower intensity fire than a full crown fire.
All right, thank you. Now, lastly, Doctor, His Honour's heard evidence of observations that there had been crowning to the south-southeast of the residence at 244 White Hills Road by approximately 2:45 p.m. on the 3rd of January 2013. Do you understand the proposition I've just put?
So I can see 244, wasn't it?
Yes.
I can see 244 there.
Okay, so can I just ask you to accept this, please, Dr. Marsden Smedley, that His Honour's heard evidence from a firefighter who says that he observed that there had been crowning in the area to the south or southeast of the residence at 244 White Hills Road when that firefighter was on the site at about 2:45 p.m.
That's plausible.
I was about to ask you, could you please give His Honour your opinion as to how, if at all, that correlates with the predictions made by your model?
Even a partial crown fire will be putting significant flames up through the canopy. It might not be fully consuming the canopy, but it would be putting flames up above the top of the trees. Now, if somebody is not a highly experienced fire modeller who is used to recording information on fires, that could give the appearance of being a crown fire very easily. Flames coming out the top of the canopy.
All right, thank you. Now, lastly, Doctor, my learned friend put to you that your assessment of the probability of the faucet fire having started in the area of the tree stump at 242 White Hills Road was based on 3 variables, and then you added a 4th. The 3 that were put to you were the fact of the campfire, the TFS reports of having found a root which had burned, and thirdly, the absence of any other cause. And then you added your observations as to the indicators of the direction of fire spread. Now, do you recall that exchange with my learned friend?
Yes.
Can I ask you, Doctor, to tell His Honour, please, what, if any, role in your assessment was played by information provided to you that there had been observations of steam coming out of the tree stump in the days after the 28th of December?
I regard that as a very important, a critical factor, because what it indicates is that there was a heat source inside the stump. And it does not worry me as to whether it was steam or smoke. The major constituent of smoke is steam anyway, but what it indicates is a heat source. And a heat source means burning.
Thank you. Now, just lastly, Doctor, my learned friend asked you some questions about a formula that he, I think, got you to plug into your laptop and come up with a number. It wasn't quite clear, so can I just clarify with you? Was it your understanding that the formula that was being discussed was the formula indicated by the MacArthur Forest Fire Danger Meters Spot Fire submodel?
That's right. With the formula, with the parameters in the formula, those that were measured off the meter by Noble, Barry and Gill and published in Australian Journal of Ecology in 1980.
Thank you. And Yes. All right. Thank you.
Good, because that would have been your fourth last leak, I think.
Sorry. Yes, Your Honour, I'm just having fun. Please, Your Honour, that was all for Dr. Marsden-Smedley.
Yes, thanks very much once again, Dr. Marsden-Smedley, for your attendance. Please take your time and you're free to go.
Thank you. I hope I've been of assistance.
Thank you.
Now that's it in terms of the plaintiff reopening, Your Honour.
Yes, thank you. Well, Mr. Reid, will let Dr. Marsden-Smedley make an orderly retreat.
Yes.
And what's next?
Mr Gilmore.
Yes, very well. And I will adjourn about 10 to 4 this afternoon.
Please.
Yes, thanks, Doctor. Mr. Reid.
I call Mark Gilmore.
Will you take an oath or choose to make an affirmation?
I'll take an oath, thank you.
Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please say, I swear.
I swear.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Gilmore. Make yourself
You're right.
comfortable there. Mr. Reid.
Mr Gilmore, what is your full name, please?
Mark Anthony Gilmore,
Your address is?
1164 Inglewood Riola Road, Kingour in Victoria.
And your occupation?
My occupation is a semi-retired fire consultant and part-time vigneron.
Thank you. Now, you have provided 3 reports in this matter. The first is the Exhibit D8, which is Court Book 15, if that could be brought up, please. Just check to ensure that we've got your first report there.
Yes, that looks like it. Yes.
That's it, thank you. The second is Court Book 16, if that could be brought up. That's a report of yours of the 4th of February 21.
Yes, that looks right.
Yeah, so attend to that. And the third is Court Book 177. And that's a report dated the 9th of May 2021.
That's correct, yes.
Yes, I attend to that. Now, could document 15 please be brought up? And could we go to page 303? Under the heading, this is part of your CV, under the heading Education and Professional Development Key Points, the first is 1993 accredited Investigator Bushfire. Could you tell the court what was involved in that accreditation?
Yes, that was accreditation through the Victorian Bushfire investigation course. The information was brought back from America, who ran bushfire, or what they call wildfire investigation at that time, and was brought back by a person by the name of Ewan Ferguson. That was then developed into a training course, and then through some interaction with America, Mr. Fabian Crowe ran that investigation course for Victoria, and it was assisted by other people. So that was a series of prerequisites, and then a 1-week live-in course, which included placing live fire, forecasting what that fire would do, and then tracing the movement back to the origin of other fires to determine their origin, cause, path, etc.
Do you know if do you know if 1993 was the first time that accreditation course had been held?
No, I don't, but it was very early on, in the first couple of years. I would
Right.
imagine.
And has that course inured, or has it gone by the wayside?
It's developed over the years. So the training, as we heard just recently, people that are in professions need to revisit their training all of the time to remain current. And in fact, the current accreditations are about to change again. And so we've been doing some work actually for Queensland on that, changing to keep up with the public safety package. So it's developed in different ways over the years to keep track with the fact that it's a certification given out by a registered training authority. So there are state and federal requirements to do that.
And have you been involved in either or both of the changes that have been made and the ongoing training?
Yes, involved in both of those. And so my career could basically be split in half. So the first half of it was as a forester, the second half of it working for a country fire service. And so in the first half of that was some very, very close work that I did with Fabian Crowe and then others that came after him that developed that course. And then in my time in the CFA, some work with Nicole Harvey, who's had the carriage of the administrative side of fire investigation in Victoria for a good 20 years or more, and assisting her with developing some of the subsets of that, including working with her on accreditation of people and currency requirements and pro formas and the like, to make sure again that is current and it is useful for other agencies that we present that course to. As an instructor, I have spent quite a good deal of time with that state course, regional courses, local courses. The state course, in fact, is now run by a mentor of mine, Mr. Les Veering, and one of my previous understudies, Mr. Brett Wagstaff. So they run that Victorian course now, and I understand they've also bought that course, which has gone to various states and New Zealand and other countries. It's been delivered in Tasmania in recent years.
Can I take you to the entry 1998 training of fire investigator assessors in New Zealand? What did that involve?
That involved 2 weeks in a train-the-trainer situation. So the chief of the Rural Fire Authority, it's called over there, came and observed the course in 1 year, and then the next year he asked Fabian Crowe and I to attend courses in New Zealand to deliver train-the-trainer for their fire investigator instructors to then deliver that course throughout their country.
Right. What's the staple of a fire investigator? What do they do?
What do? They well, the first thing they do is usually they enter the fire service and gain knowledge of fire behaviour. That's one of the basic things that occurs. But having said that, there is a small subset of really good investigators that are critical thinkers that are used to investigating. So, for instance, the compliance officers for government departments, so I'm thinking in particular in our state, the fisheries and wildlife type officers are really useful in fire investigation teams because of the way they analyse and the way they collect data. But basically understanding what a fire does, because fire investigation is basically advanced fire behaviour backwards. So you're tracing where the fire came from.
Tracing it back to its cause.
Yeah, the path, origin and cause is what we keep telling people.
Thank you. 2012 Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment. Could you tell His Honour what was involved in that?
Yeah, thank you. Again, that's part of the keeping up. So in the late 90s, in about the early 90s, I was trained as a trainer, that's the train the trainer tag. I remember it amused my stepfather greatly because I was doing courses all the time and train the trainer tickled his fancy. But then the Certificate 4 in Training Assessment is part of the public safety training package framework that registered training organisations use. And so that's had a couple of huge revamps. So in 2010, I think it was, that was redone. And so everyone that delivered training and assessment for registered training organisations had a small window of grace to continue doing that, but then had to complete a subsequent course to continue delivery.
You've been accredited as an incident controller in 2013. What is an incident controller?
Yes, the 2013 accreditation is as a level 3 incident controller, so that followed well, basically a lifetime of chasing fire around. The level 3 incident controller drops into more of a management role. So the level 1 fire, so there's 3 levels of fire, is probably the easiest way to describe this. A level 1 fire is a billy fire that a few trucks go out to, and it's wrapped up on the ground fairly easily, not that much complication. Then the level 2 has a level of complication and may have aircraft working on it. There might be structures threatened. We might be closing roads, dealing with quite a few other agencies. And the level 2 litmus test really is you didn't achieve your success at first attack. So you went out and said, we will stop this fire here, and you didn't stop it. And it continued across the landscape. And then the level 3 fire is one where an enormously large management team in a separate location of the fire manages the fire event. And so for the fire we're talking about, that sort of thing was set up in Cambridge. I'm not sure if it was level 2 or 3 when it was set up. And the person that is in control of all of those people and the entire fire effort, including all the other agencies, is the level 3 incident controller.
Could we go up a page, please, Mr. Tampone? Yes, thank you. 1984 appears to be the first time in your career that you have conducted bushfire investigations.
Yes, the requirement for bushfire reporting is basically that the cause of the fire is reported. And so in my early days of fighting fires, one of the questions you're asked in the report is, how did it start? So investigations, without being trained at that stage, just using what I'd learnt as a firefighter to try and establish how fires had started.
Have you been continuously involved in bushfire investigations, particularly how they started, since 1984, or have you had a break?
I've worked really hard at remaining involved, and that at times has been difficult. I've spent some time in management positions, including a bit of time in our state capital, and so at times that's required sort of concerted effort because we have to maintain our accreditation in Victoria. We have a minimum amount of scenes that we have to go to every year, and all the scenes are collated at a state basis. So there is just that base requirement to do enough to stay in the program. So I've managed to achieve that over my career. But it's also staying involved, staying current, keeping up with the latest trends, and so there have been some years when I may have done over 100 investigations during that period.
What's the minimum to maintain your accreditation?
It's 5.
Thank you. Now, from 2005 to the present, you have listed as a professional history key point burning issues. That's the firm that you run?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Bushfire investigator, incident management trainer, emergency management mentor. What percentage or quantity of your work since 2005 has been in bushfire investigation?
Well, the early days with burning issues was our principal, Mr. Fabian Crowe, who I mentioned earlier, had been Victoria's trainer, started burning issues, and so he had been talking to me quite often about coming to join him, and so about the 2005 date is when I was still employed, obviously, and during that period, occasionally I would take leave and go and work with Fabian, and probably the largest of those sort of things that we did, we went to New South Wales and investigated a fire there that had started in the Goobang National Park, and so during that time we've done various things in various places, and between there are three of us who work together. Our third person is in Queensland, and so during my time with burning issues, we have worked. We've done several trips to California to investigate fires there. Probably the most significant of those would be the fire that impacted on Paradise, where we traced that fire back to its origin. And then many other sort of lightning event fires, which are quite common over there, where they may get multiple fires at once, and they're a bit stretched for investigation, particularly independent investigators, which is the reason that we go there. And then around other states of Australia, delivering investigator services, but also investigator training as well. And so we're currently in negotiation with Queensland to deliver training there to the fire service, for instance.
Thank you. Now, your first report indicates that you and Fabian Crowe visited 244 Whitehill Road at the request of Messrs Dobson, Mitchell and Allport. That's so?
That's correct, yes.
When you went there, did you make notes of that visit?
Yes, I did.
Could Court Book 200 be brought up, please? And are they the notes that you made on the 19th of November 2018?
They are, and there was a comment about handwriting earlier. I'm just bracing myself for mine. But yes, they are my notes.
So I tend to that. What is the purpose of notes? Why do you take them? What's their importance?
Well, the importance of them is to be able to recall. That it is something that I suppose as a government compliance people, it's impressed upon us very clearly in the early training with any compliance activity. It's, I suppose, fairness and recording well and getting the actual facts. In committing some of this stuff to paper when you're out on site. And so it's a habit that I've developed, and you'll see some habitual things that appear in this when I look at it. So the attempt to remember before you start writing things, to put the date and the time and some of those things which help you recall that. They are generally taken in shorthand form where needed. And the intention of them is so that I can recall what I was up to when I was there. So it's not really meant to be a story for others to read, and some bits might be a bit ambiguous about what they say, but it's so that I can read and think, oh yes, no, they're the people that were there. That's where I went first. These are the things I looked at, and invariably when you read back through your notes for the first time, it's a little like proofreading your own manuscript. So when you read back, you may notice that you've made mistakes, and if you're correcting those mistakes, then the intention is to make that clear to someone who might be looking at it subsequently that the notes at the time may have been altered in some way if you've done that.
Thank you, Mr Gilmore. Now, did you also take photographs on the 19th of November 2008?
Yes.
Could documents 201, first of all, 201 be brought up? And are they the photographs to which you refer?
Yes, so that's a log of the photographs with some basic information about just the numbering and which direction they are facing when you take the photos, and perhaps and some details and observations, although they are normally scant, because again, it's just a reminder of what was meant to be.
And document 202, please. Is that a further set of photographs that you've taken?
Yes, that's the same photographs, I would think.
No.
In
a different form.
in a PowerPoint form, which I must confess my computer did for me. So it offered, do you wish to place those photographs into a PowerPoint display? And I just said yes, and then that's where it is.
I tend to both 201 and 202, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Now, what's the purpose of the photographs?
The photographs are, firstly, the record, and they record a few things, and they record the, as we've seen here, they record the thing that you're photographing, but they also record the time that you were there, the process that you're taking, and invariably in investigation situations, there's that chance that there's extra things in there that you didn't observe at the time. And so it's something certainly that in serious cases, the use of video, for instance, which has been used here. So in the background of a video, you might pick up something that you didn't think. And so there is the primary use of them, but there's also the secondary use. And our small organisation has been working hard on developing processes to use photographs, satellite images, aerial photography. In America, we did some tracing of fire runs from some drone photography that had been done by others before we were even there, and that seemed to be that's a great way to not disturb scenes, because when you walk into a scene, there's that forensic principle that every contact leaves a trace. And so when you walk, you leave a footprint. When you drive in, you leave the tracks. So the scene can be altered by you being there. So I think we're not far off seeing great use of drone technology to do scenes of all sorts.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmore. Now, can we please have document 101, photograph 0009? Now, you recognise that to be the photograph which you have as figure 18 in your report?
I'll just check that to make sure the numbers are right. Yes, that's correct.
Now, Mr. Constable Needham gave evidence that this was the area that the police were particularly interested in, apparently as the point of origin. What is your opinion as to whether or not this is capable of being a point of origin of the fire?
Well, I think I mentioned in my report that it didn't exhibit the things that I would be expecting from an area of origin. So there are indications of fire approaching this site from elsewhere.
Right. Just stop there, Mr. Gilmore. Tempone, can we have a screenshot, please? Now, you've seen how this works, Mr. Gilmore. Each indication that you get, if we can mark it on the screenshot, if you need to move to a second document because it gets too busy, please do. Yes,
okay.
Just wait for Mr. Tempone for a minute.
Yes.
I think he's ready. Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Tempone, if we start in the top left-hand corner, there is a large rock to the right there with soot staining on its left-hand side. So if you could circle so all of those dark stains of soot are shown. Yep, that's good. There's one on the next little knob across too that you can see is impacted from the left. And then up the top part of the rock as well, where flames have been wrapping around that rock. Just below there, there is, if you go to the left where that rock buries into the ground, sorry, back where you were, to the left, thank you. Yeah, just a little bit further. So if you just circle that area there, where that fire has impacted at ground level on the base of that. Thank you. The next important part.
Just stay with that one for a moment.
Yes.
What is it about those marks in relation to this being a point of origin?
Well, what that's showing is that fire has impacted this rock from the left-hand side of the photograph, not from the centre of the photograph, if you like.
You would have, if the centre of the photograph is the point of origin, you would have expected fire to impact from the centre direction.
And I think I've watched a little bit of the YouTube and I've read a little bit of the transcripts, but I tended not to for the description of investigative process. The thing about these indicators of fire travel is that they indicate which way the fire has come. And the principle of the whole thing is a bit like standing in front of your grandmother's open fire. So the front of your legs will get hot, the back won't. And so if we think in those principles, sometimes this can be really hard to grasp in the early stages. And I think the simpler we keep it, probably the easier it is for people to understand what we're saying and why we're saying it.
All right, we'll keep going.
So the next thing down is the seed head just below that circle. So that grass seed there.
Can we run with the green pen for this, Mr. Tempone, please? Or at least a different colour, thank you.
So if you circle that grass head there, and that, I'm making an assumption that behind that little rock to the right is joined to that grass stem, which would all make sense, but I don't think we need to circle the stem. It might just get a bit busy because in this circumstance, the important part is the top of the grass stem. So it's the seed, and what the seeds have is they have like a shell around them, like a pistachio nut shell that's open and holds what was the flower, becomes a seed, and it's held in amongst this shell. And on the end of the shell are very fine points and even hairs. And so if that falls and remains intact, it must fall onto an area that's already burnt or doesn't burn to still be there when you look. And so the issue with the point of origin suggested and that seed head, for instance, is that seed head has fallen onto already burnt ground. And so that would suggest also that the fire, to me, has come from the left-hand side of the photograph. And we'll see as we go some of those types of things. If we go down a little bit further, there's that large pale rock, and so if you go out a little bit from the rock and just circle the whole thing, it has a couple of points in it. There are, in our experience of, because what we do at every training course over the years is we get people to bring anomalies back to the course, because there's the training course, there's also the currency update for people. We get them to bring back their anomalies and we talk through those things, and when we introduce those, if they weren't already in the course. One of those is a little bit evident on the left-hand side of that rock. So with what I've described so far, people are starting to think, yeah, well, let's approach that rock from the left. I think I could see that, and I think I might even be able to see staining underneath there. But when a blocking object has an angle on it, all it requires is fire under it to leave that staining. And so it's quite different to when running fire goes over a blocking object and wraps around it. It's described quite often like a rock in a river is how the flames, because they're fluid and they wrap around the rock. So the left-hand side of that pretty much ignore, but if you look in the middle of the rock, where it goes down towards that little triangular slip of rock that's sharded next to it. There is a stick that's burnt on the left-hand side and not on the right-hand side. So now we're starting to talk about, I heard some discussion about macro and micro indicators. So there's a micro indicator there that fire has progressed from left to right.
Can we get Mr. Tempone to find that stick that's been partially burnt, please?
So yeah, if you look at that little micro, and we start to now move into...
Sorry, Mr. Gilmore, I just need to stop you for a minute.
Yep.
We've got a new screenshot up, do we, Mr. Tempone, or not? Then we should screenshot it, please. I'll tend to the previous one.
So, sorry, I didn't check if it was right. Yep. So in this one, if fire had approached, for instance, from the bottom right of the camera, you would expect that stick that's sitting across the rock there to be pretty much all look the same. But if you look, the fire has approached it from the left-hand side and done that impact.
Can we put a circle around that stick, please, Mr. Tempone? Thank you. Now, Mr. Gilmore, while we've got that close-up screenshot, is there anything else?
Yes. If we look to the right-hand margin there, the large rock now shows close up. We can see the fuels at ground level along that rock. So I think we talked, that's the same one I think we talked about before, the flame wrapping around it. But now you can see that the ground fuel, so the fuel sitting on the surface, to use the right terminology because that's important, so the surface fuel there has burnt right up to the rock. And that is consistent also with the fire having approached from the left-hand side of that rock. And so what we would do in this sort of circumstance on the ground, we have a series of flags. And we lean the flags, although there is dispute between Fabian and Crow and myself about which way we lean the flags. But anyway, I lean the flags in the direction that the fire flame was leaning. So I would lean the flag into the rock there and place a flag in that position. And the purpose of the flags that you can photograph, so we will go through and circle some things here, but we haven't really given you directional indicators. So it'll just be a series of circles. So if you present that to someone later on, it's difficult for them. Whereas if you have a series of flags, and I note that here there were a series of little wooden white arrows, really useful in photographs. So anyway, back to what I'm meant to be doing. The right-hand side there shows that fire approached from the left and burnt right up against the base of that rock. And so you can see the fuel is consumed right up to the rock. Rocks that have fire approach them and burn around them, quite often there's protected fuel on the back of the rock. And the other principle about all this assessing of rocks is to lift the rock and look down from above. And you'll see that outline where the fire's impacted on one side and protected fuel is on the other side when a running fire hits the rock. And so you start to build a real picture for yourself. And you are starting to listen to the scene, if you like. You're starting to it takes a little while. One of the points that we impress upon people in doing this process, which is it's a quasi-forensic science really, is that we expect them to circle the area a couple of times, and it's a bit like the first time you walk into a room, you sort of get the hang of where things are, and so some of these things start to open up for you after you've been there a little while.
Anything else about this screenshot while we have it?
Nothing that's obvious, no.
Thank you, I attend to that.
Thank you. Well, that might be a good spot, Mr. Reid.
Sorry,
Might be a good spot to
It will
finish
be,
for the
thank you.
afternoon.
Leonard Junior tells me it might be a good idea to mark burning under the rock. So to the left of where the stick is that the same burning that you were giving evidence about before?
So, yeah, if you start at the middle of the photograph on the right, is where I was talking about at ground level.
Yes.
So way over to the right, Mr. Timpano, where that large rock's sort of
We'll
coming
put
in
it-
at the margin.
Put across there for ground, that'll be the ground level evidence you gave. Across, yes.
Yep.
And then come back across to the left of the photograph.
Back to the left, you can see where a bit of larger wood has burnt under the rock and it's burnt up. Well, that can be a trap, that sloping rock, because if you look under there, you'd see that black staining.
So that's the sloping rock that you speak about.
Well, that's a principle sloping.
example.
Any blocking object or tree or anything that's sloping is allowed beware for
Can
investigators.
we put a circle around that area then? And that circle, put a B in the middle of it, Mr. Timpano, if you would. That's your beware sign, is it?
That's one of the traps in, what would I say, in the early development of people's skills, if you like. And that's why the training course centres around live fire
Can we
to try and
take
get
this up
people
in the morning, Mr.
to see
Reid?
this stuff
We
occur.
certainly can, Your Honour. Please.
Yes, thank you. I'll adjourn.
All stand please, this honourable court now stands adjourned.